SMIBB Productions began 10 years ago, which is a sentence I thought I would never honestly say. It's not the fact that we started SMIBB Productions, but it was that we made our first film 10 years ago. But it's not the same as what we have done today. 10 years ago, me and my friend John Ferguson, we were just going to do a little school project. And instead of making a poster like everyone else was about some water cycle, we decided we were going to make a little Lego stop motion. At the time, actually, I had my uncle's Legos, and he gave me his whole collection from back in the day, and it was filled with like a bunch of like 1989, like early 90s kind of like Lego sets. It was pretty great, honestly, and I was having, for a couple months, I was just only pretty much playing with all of those, having like all like the minifigures and the different types of like old bricks and like the old types of grays and like the V9 kind of batteries for like the trains and automotive stuff that they had back then. I'm a huge Lego fan, honestly, and it was pretty fun to do a little stop motion project. But we put on our friend Rome Borger because he was the one that actually had like the software to actually make it, and also he actually had stop motion knowledge, unlike us, honestly. And I never really thought of myself as like a filmmaker back in that kind of day. I did create a little comic, and you might know it as Blanket Man now. But at that time, it was just a little rinky-dink, like just a couple pieces of paper of like a character I came up with, Blanket Man, and he fought this dude named Red Boomer and Air Twin, and that was pretty much it. He had a little mouse sidekick named Ricky and a robot sidekick named S-Camera. Very, very rudimentary stuff that I kind of did. I mean, I wasn't like, I was creative, but I wasn't creative on the names, obviously, or like stories or themes or characters or anything of the sort. Roane and John Ferguson, we created our first ever short film, the Hydrologic Cycle. And as it was like a school project back in the day, it was pretty much just supposed to be educational, but we wanted to have fun with it, and basically we just created the characters of Jimmy and Tour Guide. I played Jimmy, who really wasn't any different than I was, I guess. He did domestic terrorism, and he blew up a museum, but that was in the second one. That was the decertification cycle. Actually, he was a known terrorist in the second one. But he actually broke in to the museum in the first one with like no morality, honestly, just so that way he knows why the puddle dried up, which makes no sense because there's a giant puddle he slips on, and then he goes to the pond, and then it's all dried up. But we don't get those answers until the second movie, where it's all about the decertification cycle, where, you know, I think we wrote the character of Jimmy to be really, really dense and stupid. Probably the most base character we've ever created, ever in SMIBB Productions, to be very honest. And it wasn't really until we had to really sit down and decided what we were going to do with those characters. We didn't have any plan, to be honest. We didn't have any plan going forward. After the second movie, where we brought out our friend Brody, and that was like very, very interesting prospects, honestly. As a sixth grader that went to our charter school, there was only very few people that actually would do this kind of stuff. So, you know, it was just a ragtag team of 4 sixth graders just making these kind of films. But in serious though, a lot of the stuff that we did for Hydrologic Cycle and these like little water movie stop motions, they kind of were the launch pad that I did actually want to become like a filmmaker. But it wasn't until like the year after when we wanted to do something, you know, not stop motion, but actually something in live action, honestly. Wow, shocker, I know, we're making a huge jump. We discovered you can use a camera on YouTube 10 years after YouTube was created. That's pretty crazy. And so in 7th grade, that was already the time where my friend Roane already moved, and you know, at that point I was like, oh man, that sucks. But you know what, we made a big bang of a film. We made a little feature film called Flow to the Future, and that was just a Back to the Future parody where it is the most chaotic 2 minutes that we've ever created, basically ever, honestly. It was fun. That was a fun little cute film that we made. But then after that, there was not much on our like prospected mind. Like I did some other like shorter whatever films, and honestly I don't even have them up anymore, because by the end of 7th grade I wanted to make one thing and one thing only. Blanket Man is one of like the characters I was always the most passionate about, honestly, and I created this comic, and throughout 7th and 8th grade I made a line of comic books, and this is the first official comic that I officially made. Blanket Man Begins, issue 1. It already says September 2015. September 2015. This is already almost 10 years old. I mean 9 years right now, but 10 years almost. And now just thinking about it, it's crazy of how far I've come with the character. But because of these couple issues that I made of this comic book, I really was so passionate that I wanted to make a movie. Obviously, I was like, well, we've already made movies. We can easily make movies. And I wanted to step my foot into doing a live-action film. And I wrote down a lot of little things on this like little notepad for like an entire summer. And while doing that, I still have it, and most of it is just like the cast that I wanted, which was basically just all my friends at the time. I wrote down every little story beat that I wanted, a lot of concepts and little sketches and stuff in it. And you know, I felt like an actual like production looking back on it. I wanted to make this feel like a film, and I just like I watched a lot of like credit scenes of like movies I watched back in the day, and I would know what kind of things I need to look for when I credit stuff. I would focus more on credits than like filming techniques. It explains a lot about that movie now, doesn't it? So when we planned this whole movie out, I had kind of a pseudo script, but like we never used the script. We didn't have like lines and stuff like we're gonna improv most of this kind of stuff, right? Here's the problem. I didn't have a camera. What we were gonna do with this kind of movie? Well, luckily I did have a friend that would help me out here. My friend Jake actually lent me one of his old point-and-shoot cameras, a little Nikon Coolpix camera right here. Does it even turn? There's no battery in this one, crap. This was my first ever camera that we've ever shot anything with. So most of like the original Blanket Man films were all shot on this one little point-and-shoot camera. And honestly, it looks so quaint now, but to be honest, this got me through like a couple years of my life just shooting only on this and actually having and owning a camera. And honestly, I could bring this in my pocket and bring this anywhere I wanted. It was perfect. Looking back now, it's also at 720p, which actually explains a lot. This was not in full 1080, of course, naturally, and the audio sucked. But I'm surprised that this thing, after 10 years, is still held up. But I was really fortunate to have friends that would at least, you know, helped me pursue what I wanted to do, you know, and I was really passionate about movies and filmmaking that, like, I was just glad to have a camera, you know, that was all that really it was. And it really does show the quality of the first Blanket Man, because once we started shooting that film, like, I had all my friends and I'd be like, listen, here's how I want to shoot it, we're going to do this and that. And basically it just ended up being like we're gonna shoot like before like the bells gets us to school at like 7:45, so like early morning we would film like once we got to school, and then at lunchtime we would film, or maybe a couple times we would film like after school while we're all waiting around. And yeah, that's evident obviously when you look at the film, when it's just our school's hallways and outside of our school in like the morning. Like that's all it was, honestly. But like there's nothing that I feel that ever works in that kind of movie. Like the only reason Blanket Man wants to fight the main villain is because he got powers and now he knows that he has to fight someone, and the first person he thinks of is a mentally deranged person that just escaped prison. He's like, I gotta go beat that person up, right? And my friend Roan always points that out. And that was kind of the other thing too. At that time, we never really used our friend. Like, Roan was always in our productions, but it was always weird. Like, he would, like, it wasn't like inside our production. Like, he would never, like, help mostly with, like, the script or, like, help. Like, he couldn't obviously record. He would edit, but we didn't, like, have, like, all, like, the means of great editing tools like we do now. And it was weird because, like, we were always doing productions and always doing things together, but, like, we never actually, like, did things together, and I feel like, and it was never, I mean, we were always like best of friends still to this day, and we know now what kind of productions that we can do on both our ends now, even from thousands of miles away. So I don't know, I look back at, like, especially the first two Blanket Man films, and I'm like, how did we even, there were so many things we would have done differently now. I think the more interesting topic is to talk about Blanket Man 2, because we filmed Blanket Man 1, and yeah, like, we had an idea, but like, nothing presented on screen made it so. But Blanket Man 2 is just like, I had like 100 ideas of what I wanted to do with that film, honestly. And for the most part, we knew exactly what we were going to do with the DC scenes. We went to Washington, D.C. for our 8th grade trip, and obviously I planned out for an entire year how we are going to film scenes for Blanket Man in Washington, D.C. And I think that was the most clearest vision that we had, and probably some of the best shooting on different locations than we've probably ever done. But like, you know, besides that, the rest of the film was just like 20 ideas that we basically were just throwing at the wall. Like, we were gonna do more stuff with like Red Boomer, but Red Boomer wasn't even barely a character in the first film, and then he doesn't show up in the second film. Then we were gonna do stuff with Lightning Man, but we didn't do anything with Lightning Man. Then we had a whole man blanket subplot where alien crash lands, and you don't even see really the alien in that version of the film, because not until Blanket Man Remastered did I actually like add some actual scenes to identify what the alien was even about. Then we did like an apology video at the end. And dude, that was a whole other subplot. Apparently my character for Timmy Baines was gonna have like blogs that he was gonna do, and they would cut between the film. I have a couple of those actually shot. That would have been so bad and such a tone killer, but even then, so most of the film's a tone killer anyway. It's a film Boomer's blooper. The third film, that was supposed to be a scene we would have probably used for the third film for Boomer's blooper or for Blanket Man 3, but then eventually when we did all of Blanket Man 2, then we made Boomer's blooper whatever footage we had left for like Brett Richardson and all like the Boomer and blooper stuff they were gonna, like, basically we were kind of splitting 3 films, and eventually we would cut them up to whatever footage we would have and take stuff in and out, and then basically I find more interesting, Boomer's blooper was just leftover scraps, and then basically just filming 2 scenes to just fill in gaps of like an anthology, because hey, I watched Pulp Fiction, I thought anthologies were cool. The original trilogy, though, for Blanket Man was a lot of ambition on my end. Like, I had a lot of great characters from the comics that I was writing at the time, but no one read the comics. It was just all for me. Then I was trying to put them onto, like, you know, film at a certain point, but like, I didn't have a budget. I had a lot of ideas, but just nothing would really be coherent. And they're some of the worst films that I made, but they're valiant attempts, honestly. Like, they taught me so much, but we just didn't have any vision. And the vision that we did have, we actually did write an entire dream team script. We were gonna take those 3 films and put all the heroes and put all the villains, and we were gonna have everyone fight each other, and we actually did have a full-on like 50-page script. And that's probably one of the most insane things ever. And while that probably wasn't gonna be like the magnum opus greatest film we ever would have made, I think we did have something there that if we did actually shoot stuff for that film, we could have had something, honestly, but we just didn't. We just didn't. And we actually started sitting down and planning out a new idea, a new movie idea, and it would eventually become what Making It Big would be, though. Like, the original idea for Making It Big was still that it would be 2 retired comedians wanting to make it big again. And we always had the idea and dream of, like, having them, like, being like some like 2 bums that like kind of lost their touch, and they want to like shine and do something with their lives again, and so they go to Chicago. And literally the idea, and I'm not even joking with you, the idea of the ending of the movie would be that like they go and pitch their idea for a show, and then it ultimately fails, and then it would lead to events where Gabriel would like die, and I'm not even joking, and it would be like, the third act would be like Charles being like really sad and all that, and then eventually getting a show, and then it'd be like a memorial for Gabriel. It was like this crazy, depressing film idea that we had that eventually led into some weird ideas for how we would do Making It Big. Then we just focused it on it as a comedy, right? Like, oh, it's just too low like it was still two comedians wanting to make it big again, but like they were like in some like crappy little place they were trying to like fix up in the pilot. And then in the second episode, we get our friend Seth to be some British producer, but like we were on some like college like tour, and that's basically where we filmed those scenes on Whitewater. That was actually filmed at Whitewater, surprisingly. It was pretty funny, honestly. And then the third episode was just kind of like just a bunch of little bits of like trying to assemble like a crew, like a film crew, where like they needed some cameramen, they needed a director for the film, and everyone is just the worst, and they were all hired, and it's basically like the British producer is just trying to sabotage their own show. So then episode 4 happens, and it's just an incoherent mess again. It was just like a lot of ideas that we were throwing at the wall where like we need to like rise up, and creators need to rise up against these people that, you know, are taking these creative liberties away from us. And that clearly did not make the final version of that film very apparent. And then we bring in our friend Roane and Callan, and that was when we had Callan for the first time in like one of our major productions. And funny enough, I think the idea that he was just an announcer that just bummed around with like Gabriel and Charles for like the rest of the series, and then we just kind of take that same caricature of him in Fernando. I think that's kind of funny, honestly. I really do. Now, Urban Legends was something interesting because it wasn't as like a big thing that we focused on. We were focusing on, when the first Hooked movie came out, that was when we were Blank Man Mania, right? That was all the crazy stuff we were doing for that series. Hooked was just a small film that we did because we were in a small class, an Urban Legend class, obviously, with our teacher Underwood, and he would basically we would go to camp and we would shoot little spooky little stories, and we would just have some fun with that, honestly, and just have a campfire. It was basically just a fun little class at the end of every semester that we basically just got to have fun in. And making little films was just kind of like the best part for us, especially for us. You know, we loved making films, and it was perfect. And Hooked was probably one of the more quainter films that we've ever made, but like at that time, honestly, it was probably one of the better things that we made. It was just a simple little story of a psycho slasher with like a little hook hand and killing all the people at the campground. And it was a small little easy story. There wasn't too much to take away from it, right? Except that then we made a sequel of it, and when we were doing the second film, we didn't know what we wanted to make at first, but like since it was all the same friends and we all were like, oh, we gotta make like a sequel to it, we just gotta, and we had all the ingredients, we had everyone there, and everything was pretty good to go, honestly. So we had our friend Marcy return as Psycho. I then played the idea of like, well, what if like it was all in a dream, and in this dream, the character of Maxwell that I played would be like a gunslinger, right? And I thought that would be really interesting to kind of play around with. Like everything's in the head of Psycho, and it was all like a big ploy by the Grandmaster, our teacher, Mr. Granzy, right? And we always wanted him in one of our films for like all that year. So like then he was just like, yeah, we shot some scenes with him. It was so much fun. That I just had so much of a blast with that one, and we filmed primarily just like most of like the nighttime. Like we spent like 5 hours straight just shooting with our friends all around our school late at night, and it was so much fun, honestly. Oh man, I just have some of the best memories specifically of that movie. And Hook Mind Games was one of the better movies I say we made of like our early SMIBB Production high school years. And honestly, I think it's probably one of my favorite films that we ever made. It was just the perfect people at the right time. And it was actually a film that was shown off to our entire school too. And that was some of the crazy stuff. And one of the biggest complaints of that film was that I had my friend at the time, Nicole. It was me and Nicole running up the stairs, and the Psycho like slashes her, and she's like, "Get out of here!" It's like, "Okay," and like, and it felt like everyone laughed at that because it's like, why didn't you save her? You know, like you just ran off, and she was the first female in any of our films that we did too. So unceremoniously just dying off in the most base way possible was probably some of the funniest thing that we did at the time. And it was unintentional, like seriously, it was just unintentional. We just wanted everyone to die, and then we set up the idea that like, oh, I'm gonna be the gunslinger, and we're gonna have a epic showdown at the end, and that was probably one of the more iconic moments at the time. And then eventually we would make Hook 3. We were back at the campground again, we had all the same people, but this time there was about 10 of us, and I'm like, okay, we planned it out. Like, Hook 3 was one of the most like things that like the entire semester, me and Callan planned everything out, right? We made sure that everyone brought white t-shirts and the glasses and masks so that way everyone could look about the same. We made sure that everyone would sign up for it so that way we could like plan out Hook 3 and have everything in line, right? And for the most part, we kind of had a lot of the ideas that we wanted in that film, and like a virus that makes everyone like kind of smile and turns everyone into like psychos, and Gunslinger finding down the mystery of how to cure it. Like, it was honestly one of the coolest, most collaborative films that we ever did. And I kind of miss those days, because I feel like that was one of the last films where it felt like there was just a bunch of people just having fun, making urban legend films. And the real reason after that is because after we made Hook 3, we did Whisper, and Whisper is my least favorite film that we've ever made, ever, and that's mainly because everyone was like looking to me at that point, being like, what are we gonna do next? And obviously it was gonna be like, well, we gotta continue Hook 3 in some way, or we're gonna do something new. And I'm like, we're gonna, like, Avengers Infinity War already came out that point, like in Endgame, and it's like, well, we're gonna do something crazy, right? We're gonna bring all the urban legend characters and we're gonna make them fight the Whisper. We kind of had that idea in Hook 3. And that's all it ever was. Like, it was just the idea that, you know, we're gonna just have these characters just come in one film, I guess. I don't know. Like, it is literally just like everyone dies and then they come back to life and then we kill them again and then the universe resets and that's it. Like, it is some of the worst filmmaking I think I've ever made ever. It was just like, there wasn't really an idea. Like, it was only an idea, and in concept and execution, there's just really nothing to it. And strangely enough, it's actually one of the most important films of the whole franchise. Like, without the universe resetting, that sets everything else in motion, and then, yeah, that's kind of crazy. But what I will say is that that film probably does get the most callbacks, but that's because we wanted to rectify a wrong, honestly. And then I helped out with the production of Redacted, and that was one that I only, like, filmed and edited, but, like, that was all, like, at the time, Kaylee Mazer and Michael Conrad and a bunch of those guys. Like, it was all their film, but I just helped, like, film and edit. But that was also because we were filming Whisper, we were filming Redacted. Like, it was just 2 films at, like, one day that we were trying to do, so it's kind of like just a hodgepodge of things we were trying to collectively. It just didn't work. It was like focusing on 2 things and not justifying either, even though I think Redacted was just a bit better. And honestly, probably like a better version of Hooked. Honestly, I do think a lot of things we did in that one is a lot more quainter, but like, I think it was still a fun little film that we all worked on, honestly. Cause honestly with making a big season 2, I think the biggest problem that we had with it is that we just dragged on a kind of nothing plot with the secret society of cameramen. The announcer killed the CEO's cousin. Gabriel is having a lot of doubts and, you know, has his own visions of what he wants to do, but Charles is now getting pushed and swayed by British producer, and it did not need to be 5-episode long arc of doing it. It was so dragged out, and I don't blame anyone for kind of bow-wowing out at that point for SMIBB Productions. I actually totally understand at that point. Like, it was so tedious, long, and boring. But like, there was a couple things I liked throughout it, but it's just the most forgettable things that we've ever done, and I don't remember most of it sometimes. But like, the other 2 things that we did that year as well that I do remember fondly, like Project Habit Life Proof was one of the coolest films that we did, because that was the film right after COVID, where I'm like, oh man, but we're not in school anymore and there's no urban legends, and we wanted to keep the tradition going, and so we made a film and had ideas of like how we would want to follow up Whisper in this new universe, right? So with Project Habit Life Proof, how do we
evolve the characters and do something new with the franchise? Well, we just make a Project Habit sequel. We throw in Psycho that remembers everything of the old universe, but everyone else, it was like the events of Hooked didn't happen, so all those characters were alive. And that's basically the linchpin of what changed, is that like the Psycho still remembered everything, so he's still the Psycho, but like every other character is now completely different. But if the events of Hook didn't happen, right, if Psycho remembered everything, he's a good guy now. Everyone else is still there, right? Like, we made Redacted canon, and then that made it so that way the facility and all that stuff still happened in actually both universes. So really, the Redacted happened in both universes, and then everything after Project Have a Life Proof was like its own separate storyline, which would eventually lead into stuff like Cursing Mary Bradford, Redacted Patience, Wanderer, blah blah blah. But the other thing we did in 2020 was Blanket Man Remastered. And during COVID and during the summer following COVID, I worked on re-editing all the Blanket Man films, because at that time it was over a year since Boom vs. Blooper came out, and I really sat down, like, I really want to go back and fix the mistakes and try to make the vision that I wanted to for Blanket Man. And so I created Blanket Man Remastered to kind of do something new, while adding new footage, re-editing, taking away things that didn't need to be there. It was the definitive version of the film. And actually now, it's crazy, since that film 4 years ago, we've literally found footage that we thought we lost forever and we actually found again, which is kind of crazy. Like, it's actually pretty crazy that we found even more footage, but I don't feel like re-editing, you know? I think that we don't need to do more for that film, but it is now the definitive way of all the 3 films that I created. It kind of fixes a lot of problems with Blanket Man 2 and Boom vs. Blooper. I added a lot more scenes, just replaced scenes for the first Blanket Man film, but even then, so it doesn't really fix the problems with those films, but it does make it the vision and definitive way that I wanted to make those films the way I did, and with more editing prowess and knowledge of that now. But I do think 2021 was probably the more interesting year for us, because we were seniors at the time and we didn't know what would happen after high school. And it was probably the last true year where we came up with a lot of releases. Like, we finished season 3 for Making It Big. It was 3 episodes, and we wanted to just kind of end the characters and the story that we wanted to. So we kind of just, episode 10 was just scurrying around to just finish the plot lines and lingering threads, so that way episode 11 we could tell a story about Gabriel's father and his heritage and how he feels about it and what he wants out of life. So by episode 12, when it's a bottle episode with Charles and Gabriel, they have to make the final decision on what they want in life. And what they want is not what they wanted in the originally, right? Like, they originally wanted to make a sitcom to make it big again, but they realized that's not what it was about. And it was kind of a reflection at the time for us at that point, you know, like, you know, Making It Big in our minds, you know, like, oh, we can do like the Hollywood dream, we could, you know, do all these big crazy YouTube videos and become successful, blah blah blah, but like, that's not realistic at all. And the things that we really wanted out of life were just much smaller, much more simpler, you know, like, I don't care to be in like the Hollywood fame ever. I don't really want to. I just want to make films that I'm like proud of, honestly. I just want to have fun with my friends. I don't want to make it like work, you know? Like, I want to do this because I genuinely care and have the passion to create something, to make it art. Film is an art, and to just Making It Big for like eternity, it loses that. And honestly, Making It Big didn't feel like art, but I wanted to make something out of a mess and make it, I don't know, I'm not gonna call it beautiful, but you know, it's just now a polished piece of turd. We were really harsh on Making It Big. I think the last 2 episodes were exactly the show that we almost wanted to make, but honestly, Fernando was the show we wanted to make. Fernando was the exact thing that we wanted to make originally, Making It Big. It's kind of a parody of sitcoms without being a sitcom, because it's a YouTube video. We focused on short-term bits, and Fernando is a comedy that is irreverent and does not take itself seriously.
We don't care for sincerity, and by keeping it that way, it's always a comedy. It's always supposed to be fun, and it's just supposed to make you smile, right? And if we don't do that, then we're doing something wrong, honestly. The four main projects really that we focused on was everything urban legends, like Redacted Patience, The Wanderer, and Whispered Trinity. Those are three films that we actively had a plan for, right? Like, The Redacted Patience and The Wanderer, we knew had to set up Whispered Trinity, and we were filming Whispered Trinity between all those films after Project Have a Life Proof. Because after Project Have a Life Proof, we started having the ideas and started filming for Whispered Trinity. But we knew that we wanted a couple other things to come before it. And so Redacted Patience filled in the gaps for more lore about the facility where Redacted came from, and introduced the character of like Jazz Riff, which we didn't really think would be such a big character, honestly. We threw him in kind of last minute with Whispered Trinity, but we had a couple other characters that eventually would become bigger plot relevance through later films, like especially in Nowax. But in all honesty, The Wanderer was the one film that we just didn't think would be like an urban legend per se. Like, we had more of the idea of like it would be a standalone little thing that we would do, and then eventually be like, well, what if The Wanderer had a whole backstory where he created in some parts the Life Proof Serum? And it was just a small little story that we kind of had with the Officer Duchesne subplot for The Wanderer, and then eventually that would be the linchpin of what Duchesne would be looking for through Whisper Trinity. And when we started filming Wanderer stuff, we started adding scenes from The Wanderer for Whisper Trinity. So there's a scene in the first act where Officer Duchesne looks through the woods and sees The Wanderer, and it says, "The Whisperer is coming, the Whisperer." And that was shot exactly right after we shot some of the stuff for The Wanderer. So we were filming a lot of these scenes for the case that we would do for Whisper Trinity. And even with Redacted Patience, we shot a couple scenes with like Pun Killer and a couple other characters, like a couple shots that we used in Whisper Trinity too. So all in all, Whisper Trinity would eventually take things from two of the films that we set up, and then Whisper Trinity was going to be at the time the biggest film that we were going to do, where every urban legend character comes together. And actually, by some means, we brought back Gorilla Man, we brought back Pun Killer, we brought some new faces and new characters, we brought in Habit and Redacted, and then we brought back Gunslinger and X-Dread officially back in this film, since the last time we saw him in the first Whisper film, so we kind of keep it congruent. Whisper Trinity was weird in hindsight because it didn't really have Whisper, but the way I always look at it, and especially after Whisper Echoes of Dread, X-Dread is Whisper, or will eventually become the vessel that will be Whisper, and so I always looked at X-Dread being pretty much the surrogate for what the Whisper would become anyway, and so in hindsight that makes more sense for the film if you looked at it. And also it's called Whisper Trinity, so most of the film sets up the idea that there's three of them that you gotta worry about, right? The three Ippiuses, right? You have the Whisperer, Wanderer, and Waymaker, right? So the Wanderer had his own film, and we get the idea that he was one of them. We have the Whisperer, and then who's the Waymaker? Well, then the Waymaker's revealed to be Tim the Boat. You saw him throughout the film, so I thought that kind of worked to bring a lot of characters in. And actually, Tim the Boat was an interesting one because he was in his own film, The Rise of Tim, and that was not a film that we did. And we did put Tim the Boat in Project Out of Life Group, but I voiced that version because I didn't think I would ever get my friend JP to voice him. But when we were doing this for Trinity and I knew Tim the Boat was going to be in it, I told him, I was like, hey, I have all these lines for Tim the Boat, do you think you would want to record them and be in like our big combined film? And he of course said yes. And for when Gorilla Man Uprising and Redacted Files came out, he was also very happy to do his lines. And honestly, the greatest thing about JP is that he wouldn't just do the lines that we gave him, he would literally write his own stuff and honestly just make it better. And the dialogue and the acting, the voice performance was some of the best stuff we've ever done. That like Tim the Boat always chewed up so much of the scenery, and it was so delightful to have just all those moments with Tim the Boat. And so I was really happy for all the films that he was in, pretty much. In Whisper Trinity, in a lot of ways, that was like our swan song for high school and urban legends, but it wasn't the end. Because after that we did, and I was working on for a while, the Mania pilot. And so instead of doing something Blanket Man, I had another group of characters. And that was a group of characters I worked with my friend Cameron. And us two were working with, we made like a comic back in the day. And so I thought it would be really cool to bring those characters into animation form. And for the most part, I think it was a cool and valiant attempt, honestly, to do something new that wasn't Blankerman, but to introduce the newcomers, and honestly one of my favorite characters I've ever created, Indemnification, but also to introduce Overseer and Cosmo and make them live action, so it has like ties to the Blankerman universe, but is always introducing something new. And as a pilot, I think it works pretty well. Like, it didn't need to be something like grand, but I did a lot of my friends help with the voice acting. I did a whole soundtrack for that film. I introduced my favorite characters, Overseer and Cosmo, one of my favorite comic book characters I've ever created, and putting them into live action, I couldn't have been more happy for, honestly. And then we did the Mania prologue 6 months later, like not even 6 months later, and I wish I didn't make it. Like, I was really happy to make it, and I had my friend Kaylee, and even my friend, online friend Kevin Aurora. It was kind of more unnecessary, but I do like trying to tap my feet into some animation. And eventually we would do Overseer and Star, the Dream Team, where we would just take the same animation style and do it for the Blankerman cast instead, and still have Overseer and Cosmo kind of narrate the story. And I think they were all, like, that little trilogy of animation was one of the cooler things that we did. But after that, I kind of knew and sat down, like, I don't want to just do animations with these characters, right? I want to go back and do comics. And since then, I've thought about how I wanted to do these comics, and right now, actively, I am making a Blankerman issue 1 official comic that I do want to release eventually to the public, like a digital comic, and I'm really excited, and eventually I will try to get that out more. I'm pretty far into sketching and drawing out, and eventually I will do some digital inkings for it, and the story's coming along pretty well. It's one of my most passionate things I've wanted to done, and animation really, I want to do it in animated form when I do them in films, but for the time being, I think comics are the way to go. But besides that, the thing that we were most passionate about at that time was just finishing the Urban Legend saga, right? We had Grillland Uprising, Redacted Files, Project Praxis, Wanderer 2, and Whisper Echoes of Dread. We did those 5 films. We planned out pretty much the ideas that we wanted to and made the 5 films, right? Grillland Uprising was probably the more interesting production, to be honest, because it was filmed when me and my friend Roane were together when he came back into town, and he shot half of it and directed half of it, and we came up with half the ideas, which was supposed to be the original Wanderer 2. But when all that footage was just kind of in limbo for a while, we didn't know what to do. And so I wanted to add some scenes for Gorilla Man, and so I had my brother-in-law Adam shoot a couple more Gorilla Man scenes, but that was also before they moved, and my sister and brother-in-law moved out of state, and that meant we couldn't film the rest of the Gorilla Man scenes, and so then we had to film other scenes, and we did at Safe Haven with John Clark, and we kind of had to make the film work, and we also filmed the scenes with like Cycle last minute pretty much too, and so with all those scenes in mind, we kind of made a Wanderer 2 film to make it a Gorilla Man film, and it was just taking a lot of different ideas and just trying to make it into one coherent, and I think it worked pretty well. But in hindsight, I always kind of think to myself here right now, I wish I would have made Grillman Uprising and Redacted Files the same movie, because I love both those movies so much, but it's the same arc for Jazz Riff, and Jazz Riff's arc was one of the, it was one of my favorites doing, obviously, like, it had more depth. It was mostly the through line through all of these films at this point. We didn't know Jazz Riff would be such a main character, but then eventually with Grillman Uprising claiming him to be the last gunslinger, it was more compelling, because then it was like, okay, if this is the last gunslinger we set up in Whisper Trinity, we have to put stakes, right? He has to be the last one now, right? So that does set up stakes for the rest of the 5 films that he does appear in, so he was the through line. But with Redacted Files, it was actually supposed to be originally an anthology. It was supposed to be 2 films. It was supposed to be an anthology, but it was also supposed to be the origins of Grandmaster. And eventually that just kind of hodgepodge into, well, we need to follow Grillman Uprising. We also had a lot of stuff that we were going to do with Maze Baker in that film, but then Kaylee Mazer also had to move. And so when me and Rowan sat down, we're like, well, we want to kill off Maze Baker, but we also want to kill off Tim the Boat. And our honest idea was like, why not do both? And then have our, setting up the villain of Shadow Man in this film, and that's how we would kill him, right?
We had two problems. One is that we couldn't figure out a way to film Walker into those shots, right? So what we had to do is that we had to cut the scene off in Reactor Files, and we knew that the rest of it would have to be in Whisper Echoes of Dread, the last film, so that way everyone would be in the last film. And then that scene took a year, and that's one of our favorite scenes we ever shot, because when Roane came back a year later when we knew we'd do Whisper Echoes of Dread, that's when we filmed and finished the rest of that scene. And so we sat on that scene for a year, right? So after Kaylee left a year ago, JP already recorded all the lines. That's when we filmed all the scenes for Walker, and then we filmed the scenes of Tim the Boat, like burning and stuff. And that wasn't, the one that we burned was not Tim the Boat. We still have Tim the Boat. He's still alive, but we just used another red paper boat and we did that. So yeah, we burned him, and then in some behind the scenes stuff, we also went to a shooting range and shot another one. So he's not also burned alive, but he was shot. And that's one of my favorite bloopers that we ever did too, honestly, so that was just some fun stuff. But yeah, Redacted Files was supposed to be an anthology, but didn't end up being that way, which would eventually lead into its kind of sequel, Project Praxis, where we would follow the events and focus only on Nathan, Agent Nug, Praxis. And that was a film that was pretty interesting because it was only just me and Cameron working on that film, and there was a lot of like themes of suicide, but also like life and kind of just coexisting with one another. And it was a character study kind of film, but it wasn't a film that in hindsight did a lot to like further plot stuff, but I think that's okay because it was just something a little more experimental that we kind of worked on, honestly. And hopefully the message of suicide hopefully was a good message. We wanted to put like the message of just accepting life, acceptance. That was the theme, the message of that film. But at the same time, we were also shooting The Wanderer 2, the true version of Wanderer 2 that we wanted to make, where we actually wanted to kill off the Wanderer. And so that was basically all we did, right? Like, John Bergerson was totally on board for it. Like, we're like, yeah, we're gonna kill off your character in this film, but we want to have it like your body contorts and like you're just trying to aimlessly wander until you eventually find your home, right? And then you say your final line, home, right? It's not a movie full of death, but it's such a simple, but I feel like an effective plot. It's like Fred Nodge is like dead, right? And the way I looked at it at the end of Whisper Trinity is that Fred Nodge died in that film, but the Wanderer took over the vessel, but slowly was corroding him over time. Like, he killed Dwayne, he never saw Maxwell again, right? And I think all that kind of stuff, like, really set in with him, that, like, he's, like, one of the most tragic characters. And honestly, I look at Fred Nodge as, like, the Oppenheimer of the urban legends. Like, he created Life Proof and set everything down to shit, essentially. And he's probably the most tragic character we ever came up with because he created such a thing that basically created all these monsters, but also was the reasoning why all the Ipiuses were let loose, right? And why eventually everyone died because of that, right? Because of Walker and all the imbalance that happened because of him. And so the Wanderer dying is really just tragic and sad, right? Mostly for Fred Nodge. Like, the Wanderer did some awful things, but Fred Nodge is just... He's just had a bad go of it, honestly, and so him dying is just finding peace. And honestly, Praxis and Wanderer 2 actually have the same themes of acceptance and finding peace within yourself, right? And it dawns on me because we literally have a scene with the Wanderer in Praxis, you know, and there is a through line in both those films, right? And especially since Grandmaster is kind of the through line of both those films that'll eventually lead to Whisper Echoes of Dread. And with Whisper Echoes of Dread, that was a film where we knew exactly what we had to do. It was probably the most thematically rich film ever. Like, we knew we already had the scenes to kill off Maze and Tim the Boat. We had all the ideas of Michael Walker trying to be as threatening as possible. We already shot the scenes of the final scene where we had the hooked reunion, and that was probably one of my favorite scenes that we also filmed too, where we had Bryce, Callan, Marcy, and I, and with Underwood, like, we had everyone together again, and that was just like a somber ending. Like, that was supposed to be like the happiest ending for all these characters, right? Like, bring it back to the roots, bring it back to the beginning again, keep it simple. Everything's supposed to be in legend, right? And that was kind of like the meta theme of the whole film. Like, you know, because Maze Baker leaked everything in redacted files, you know, it's not legends anymore, right? They're real, right? And Walker had to correct those mistakes, right? And maybe that was correcting our own mistakes as well too. But the themes are kind of both a little bit meta, but also like in universe, it makes sense. And having Jazz not having the choice to, Jazz didn't have the choice, didn't feel like he had a choice in any of the matter. He was always being told by Whisper he didn't have a choice. By Walker, it felt like he didn't have a choice. It was like the illusion that choice wasn't there, but it was there, right? If he embraced the Whisperer, right, that was his choice, right? And that is what set everyone free, right? Like, his universe died, but it gave new life again, and it was back to the way that it was supposed to be. Not because someone told you to, right? Because it was your choice to do the things that you needed to do, right? That you felt like in your heart needed to happen. And for the right or wrong choices, it's like, it's human though. It's so human. Even if it's like the right or wrong choice, it doesn't matter. We do it every day. And that's kind of like the big themes and kind of the meta message that we wanted to leave off. That like, it was our choice to just end the series, but we know that in other people's hands, maybe they could tell better stories, honestly. And I would love to come back to Urban Legends one day. I'm not gonna lie, like, I think like if I did Urban Legends again, I would like to do a new, completely new story. None of the same characters. Maybe except 2. I think there's only 2 characters I can ever see myself bringing back fully. I always thought about bringing back Praxis at one point, because Praxis' character didn't feel like he had like a full-on ending, but then I kind of thought he did, you know? Like, I didn't think like bringing the full Praxis entity isn't like necessary, right? But like, because of the new universe, you know, not having Praxis inside Nathan's mind, it's okay. Like, that probably was the better ending, honestly. Praxis is a parasite. You can coexist, sure, but like, that does take a mental toll on your brain, right? And it's okay to just let go sometimes. Let go of the things you do love, or let go of the things that you know are toxic, you know, and that's sometimes just okay. And that's still a choice at the end of the day too, right or wrong. And the only 2 characters I could ever see bringing back, we have 2 kind of weird ideas. Like, Shadow Man makes the most sense, obviously. Shadow Man is the character, like, the Willed is the one that can see all. He is beyond time right now, and I think that's okay. Like, I think that's okay. Like, he's just kind of like a pseudo-demigod, a watchful eye over the universe, this new universe. He's the balance, right? He is the pure balance of this universe, and I think that's okay if we brought back him for another story one day. I thought about the Wanderer, but like, I think the cheeky idea that we had is like the Wanderer or Maze Baker is like stuck in like eternal purgatory for like the rest of their lives, but like, yeah, the Willed is basically the only character we can see ever bringing back, ever, to be honest. And that's pretty much it. And Fernando was one of and honestly, the only other thing that I want to really take note of is that Blankerman Legacy was like the last film I'll say that I wanted to force myself to make. Like, Blankerman Legacy was a fun idea. We had a lot of fun ideas with that film. We wanted to rectify some of the old films that we did. And honestly, one of my favorite comments I ever saw was "Weighted Blankerman," which is so true. Like, it's Blankerman feeling the weight and the guilt of all the things that he's done. He's been such a spiteful asshole in the last films, and we put that to the forefront of like all his like flaws and mistakes, right? But Cyclone gives him a chance. Overseer gives him a chance. Everyone in his life gives him a chance, right? And I think that, and Remix gives him a chance too. Like, that's the things where I feel like we want to give Blankman a chance again to be in the limelight again, and that's I mean, that's not a hard thing to probably get from the movie, but it's something that we want to bring back. We want Blankman to be something great and something special, honestly. And and we want to bring back the comic too. But even at the same time, we want to do it right. And right now, I thought after that we wanted to take a break from doing some like filmmaking stuff. Like, we love doing Fernando. Fernando is so much fun to do. We have all these plans for season 3 next year, and for our 10th anniversary, I want to make like the best things that we can possibly make. But I don't want to just do things to continue a franchise, to do a series. Like, we have so many fun ideas for season 3 of Fernando, but also one of the most passionate projects we're doing right now is the Dogma film. It's because we generally have a story. Like, I actually have a story to tell that'll be interesting and something new to tell, because after the small short film, I'm like, there's more that I want to tell with this story, right? Like, that's just a proof of concept, and this is probably one of the most exciting things I'm actually working on. We're actively working and filming right now. We have most of it scripted out. We have all the story, all the themes and the characters that we want to tell, and I think it's going to be the most exciting prospect for our future right now. And for 10 years of SMIBB Productions, it's already crazy to think that, like, we've done so much, but how much we can do so much better, you know, and how much more exciting it is. And for Dogma, I want this to be like the swan song for my senior year of college, because after college, I don't know what will happen, but I'm not going to stop this. We're not going to stop this at all, honestly. We're going to keep doing what makes us happy and makes us passionate about this. So I don't see us ending anytime soon. I like where we are right now. And we're gonna focus more on some projects that we're more passionate about. But today is the 10th anniversary of our first released film. But next year will be 10 years of SMIBB Productions, and for the next year, December 2014, December 2015, was when SMIBB Productions really became molding into what we wanted to become, and today. Because December 2014 was when our first video came out. December 2015 is when our channel was created. And now it's December 2024, and we got a lot of exciting prospects for the future. And by next year, December 2025, that will be the 10 years of this channel. And I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm excited. And I hope you're excited too.